legal counsel. Thank you. Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining Cura. Cura is a platform that is created to curate socially conscious leaders into a network. We really were born from the inception of the idea was about cura personalis and care for the whole person, care for the whole self. So we are looking to build our network of socially conscious leaders and resources that we can share so that people can navigate a career in life and choose what they want to do to have a more purpose-driven and fulfilling experience. Our purpose for these events is to come for the network, to come and meet each other, to meet the speakers. They are curated specifically for these topics that we need. They are open to having you reach out to them and network with them. So please come for the networking experience and just make sure you add Cura to the note if you want to reach them on LinkedIn. We want you to stay for the authentic conversation and dialogue. We hope to have a place to demystify tough topics. It's something that I always wished for growing up, that I still wish for, that I have questions to ask, and sometimes it's hard to find the right resources. So we want to invite people that help us figure things out. And last, we want you to leave with resources, tools, and learnings. So more than just having a conversation, we really want you to leave with something actionable. And we're also building resources on our site on cura.us to help you navigate early career networks and transitions within careers in a more authentic and purpose-driven way. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, Valeri Williams. We had the pleasure of meeting, gosh, Vallerie, I think about 10 years ago.
Yes, not more.
A long time ago. We were both working at a financial institution, developing and creating public relations and marketing campaigns to educate diverse segments and populations. She has had such a fascinating career, and I so much admire that she has been able to navigate from corporate America to as an entrepreneur and manage to work part as a mental health therapist, licensed therapist, as well as a business consultant. So when we had reconnected, I was really eager to have her talk to us a little bit about the intersection of mental health in the workplace. So our conversation today will be geared around that conversation. We encourage people to just ask questions as they come up. You don't have to wait for a formal end time with Q&A. You're welcome to just pause us and interrupt as you see fit. Vallerie, do you mind giving a little bit of an overview on your journey and how you got here?
Sure, but first I just want to thank you, Jen and Alejandro, for creating not just the opportunity for me to sit with your group today, but just for creating the platform. I think whenever there's an opportunity to talk about work and life planning within the context of the whole person, it's amazing. And unfortunately, there are too limited of options to be able to do that. And I think that unless you can approach work and goal planning or whatever it is that, whatever your aspirations are, unless you can approach that from the perspective of the whole person. And when I think whole person, I think the emotional self, the mental self, the physical self, as well as all the other, the skills and abilities. Unless you can bring all of that to an experience, then there's no way that you can really thrive. So I love that Cura is creating the platform to be able to begin to have more of those honest conversations, that productive dialogue around how we do that, and particularly for people of color, because that tends to be a unique struggle for us more so than our counterparts. So I applaud and commend you on your efforts, and however I can be a part of supporting your platform, I am open to do that. So a little bit about me. So I spent about 20 years in corporate America before branching off back in 2019, right before the pandemic, into entrepreneurship. My career in corporate spanned working in communications, human resources, public relations, within spaces that allow an opportunity to connect with people. I knew very early on, right out of college, that if I was going to go into corporate, that it had to be in a space where the heart of the organization was focused on people. And I really feel like communications allowed us an opportunity to do that. So I've had the opportunity to work with Fortune 25 organizations across different industries, and learned a lot, met a lot of people along the way. I tell people all the time that my transition into entrepreneurship was not about this anti-corporate sentiment. There's so much I value about the work that I was able to do. I would say probably midway through my career, I was able to really connect more to my purpose and be able to do purpose work in corporate. So I think both can be true. Sometimes we feel like we have to leave corporate in order to live out our purpose and calling. That is not true. But for me, after 20 years in corporate, I made a decision where I just wanted more freedom and flexibility to own and create whatever it is that I did next. And so that was a huge motivation for me deciding to take that leap and focus on the clinical counseling side, so that mental health part of people. I feel like we did that in corporate. If you are in PR communications, you have done a lot of incognito psychological work. In fact, that was one of the things that I loved about the latter part of my career is when we were focused on multicultural marketing and diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of the strategy was built on understanding the attitudes and behavior of what's considered the psychographics of people in their audiences in order to build messaging and tools and products, et cetera, to meet those specific needs. So that's just an example of how I felt like I was still operating in my purpose within corporate, but again, wanted to take that leap and go off on my own and just be able to have that freedom to create and explore and to go deeper. So 3 years later, I am still working independently. I have not looked back, even through the pandemic. Again, I resigned in November 2019. And then, of course, by March of 2020, the country was shut down. That was not in the plan, but I learned to navigate around it. And so in this new space, as Jen mentioned, part of my work is working as a licensed therapist. I did become licensed while I was still in corporate. I ran a private practice part-time while still in corporate for a few years. So I work with in a clinical capacity, probably I would say at this point, maybe a good 60 to 65% of my time. And then on the business consultant side, I work with corporate organizations, nonprofits, small businesses on the people related stuff. And so that might mean diversity, equity, and inclusion, more recently, culture and wellness. So helping businesses who want to take more of I would say like a psychosocial emotional approach to corporate experiences. That's my niche there. So still being able to figure out ways to bring the best parts of myself from a corporate perspective to those relationships. So that's a lot. I'll pause there.
Valerie, that's so rich, because I think it's one of the things I'm most curious about. You mentioned a couple things. One is that there's not a lot of spaces to talk about that intersection, right? I felt that different parts along my journey were very stressful. Applying for the job, interviewing for the job, being rejected by the job, applying again. Then you get the job, and then navigating the politics, navigating it. What are some of the lessons that corporate America taught you about that intersection, right? About managing those emotions throughout the process? And what were some of I agree with you, right? That corporate America is getting a tough rap right now, but there's great things on it as well, right? There's some job security. There's some lessons to be learned. Can you tell us a little bit about wellness in the corporate America space and what you learned from it?
Sure. So one thing, also I'm going to say a couple of things, but if you can learn how to navigate in corporate and have a certain level of success, there are not too many places that you can't navigate. So if for no other value, I would say resilience and perseverance, especially for people of color, because we start off coming into those opportunities, questioning lots of times our value, our worth, are we good enough, being, one of only or the only in the room. And so if you get in that space and you learn how to navigate and you manage to learn how to thrive, chances are you had to work exceptionally hard to do that, and you probably didn't have the same support as your non-BIPOC counterparts. So just by virtue of being able to have that level of success, and it's like, if I got through that, I can navigate in any room. I'm up for any challenge. So that's definitely something that I walked away with. By the time I left corporate, I was ready. I was ready to take on any challenge, including, like I said, what turned out to be the pandemic, right? As far as the other things that I believe are really valuable, and what I've noticed with, I would say, younger millennials and Generation Z, there is this anti-corporate sentiment. I was actually just having a conversation with my oldest son, he's in his early 20s, about this conversation, because most of his friends did not take a traditional corporate career path. And I applaud that generation for having more focus on purpose and creativity. But I also think it's to their detriment, because they miss that opportunity to benefit from the value that corporate does offer. And so I know social media makes entrepreneurship and influencing look really sexy and savvy and very easy. But the sad reality is that most businesses led by people of color don't thrive. And we've learned, and especially working in the financial services space, that a lot of that is because they lack business acumen and, of course, access to resources and all those other things. So being able to, even if you have a greater goal of ultimately running your own business or thriving in a creative career, getting that initial experience in corporate will help you gain a better understanding of business operations. Like, what is a business model? What does a business structure look like that will allow you to be successful and run a business, regardless of whether or not you're selling shoestrings or hair products? So understanding what positions are important in terms of having someone over operations, having administrative support, having human resource support. So things along those lines, like understanding the corporate structure of an organization, those roles and why that's beneficial. Networking is essential, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that a couple times before we're done. But I have had a lot of the success that I've experienced in my current space is truly off the strength of relationships that I've built in corporate, at least on the business consulting side. I've been blessed so far that I haven't had to proactively market my services just yet. That's a 2023 goal, but most of the opportunities have come from relationships that were established in corporate. And so being in a place where you have that built-in access, and as people of color, we often lack that because we don't necessarily have that generational experience of business ownership, or again, our grandparents having access to capital or resources, or the executives at this company or that company. In corporate, you are in it, and so you have that direct access, even if it's not always easy, or even if it doesn't always feel like it's within reach, it is there. And so the beauty of networking across the business, so that way, when I talk about the people who supported me in this space, they weren't just people from corporate communications or marketing. There were people that I'd met in finance or IT or just name your discipline. They were definitely, represented across all disciplines. The mentorship is super important. Again, you have a wealth of people who are generally willing to help. I know it can be overwhelming and intimidating to ask for that support sometimes, or to ask for that mentorship. But I found that most people, the majority of people, are still good. And most people still like to feel like they are a part of something and a part of something special. And so if they have an opportunity to contribute to your growth and your development, or help support your business aspirations, more than not, they will. And so that is, again, built into this corporate ecosystem that doesn't exist when you're off on your own.
That's a really interesting point, Valerie. When you were saying that, it just made me think that, do you think that having that network and having those mentors contributes to like higher satisfaction, more contentment, more joy at work? I mean, I think about the most fun times I've had at work, right? And like I think about it's so much of it has to do with the team and the connection aspect of it.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I miss the most working independently. And I'm not at a space yet where I've built a team, again, 2023. But for people of color, relationships are so important, and community and belonging is so important. It's generally how our families are structured, how our neighborhoods are structured. So whenever there's an opportunity to duplicate that in a corporate environment, it absolutely makes the work more fulfilling. Because the data will tell you time and time again that one of the reasons why people stay in jobs where they're unhappy is because of the people, because of the relationships that they've built with colleagues, because of the mentors that are there. And so, yeah, I think absolutely once you make those connections, you do have a more fulfilling experience because you feel like you belong to something, and then you create it feels like, someone has your back and you're not off on your own. And sometimes we can, especially again, as people of color, feel very isolated and on our own when it's just us, on a team, or just us in a conference room. So being able to establish those relationships there is vital. It's beyond necessary. It's absolutely vital in order to have success.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, certainly to get the work done, but for just the simple fun and enjoyment of the actual experience, that's such a big part of it. Lorraine, I'm going to pause there, Valerie. I saw Lorraine's thinking face, and I just want to see if Lorraine or Natalie have any questions for you directly before we go on with other questions.
It was just a comment. I like that comment you made, Valerie, about just you're not looking back, because I'm going through a similar transition myself. I'm a former principal at Sacred Heart Nativity for the last 7 years, and took a pause. Everybody thinks I'm retiring, but I'm not retiring. I'm getting certified as a life coach and also an educational consultant. But you're right. In all of my practice clients right now have been all because of relationships, and just talking to people and I'm calling myself the CEO now. And I read that book, The Energy Bus, and it's all about just the chief energy officer, right? The chief energy officer by John Gordon wrote the book, but it's so motivating. And just to be able to bring people on the bus, or utilizing the people that you do have, and those are relationships. So it's exciting. Especially people, BIPOC folks that are taking that leap to be able to do this. But all of my coaching is kind of centered around wellness, and I'm writing curriculum now for our alumni, which has been really exciting. It's just, from how to talk to a college professor to how to create a block schedule, for yourself, and then also nurturing your mind, body, and spirit, and just looking at all of those spaces. Because I think for a lot of the young adults, they're not in that structure anymore in a school environment, and they're adults and they're expected to be adults and figure it out. But so many of them are just lost. Right. And so I think that group, the millennial Gen Z, I have 2 of them of my own, one's got it. The other one's like just kind of wavering. But, I think the wavering and sitting with it is something that they have to do also.
Yeah, for sure. And also we are creatures of habit. We all crave structure. The structure that was present as early as kind of birth and as toddlers, it is replicated in the school system. And then outside of that, you lose that unless you're really in a corporate environment or academia. And so for those who are choosing like non-traditional careers, they lack that structure that, again, we all long for, even when sometimes we fight against it.
Yeah.
I think that there's an opportunity for people like us who have kind of been in corporate, who figured out how to be successful, to make corporate more appealing, make it sexier for those generations.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, my concern for us is that, again, as people of color, we will suffer more than our non-BIPOC counterparts.
For sure.
Because of the lack of access, or just, again, lots of times we're talking about first generation graduates or first generation leaders. And so absent those kind of more formal structure systems, you don't really have access. So I think that that's something that's been on my heart a lot recently, kind of what is my responsibility to help cultivate a generation who believes in corporate, and corporate has, not done its part. Mm-hmm. Academia has not done its part. There's been a recent shift for sure. And I think a clearer understanding that they have to tap into those audiences and engage those audiences because they are the future workforce. Mm-hmm. But there's still a lot of work to do.
Definitely.
And they often come to you for that, right, Valerie? They come to you because they say, we feel the gap. We feel the chasm between our employees and ourselves. What do you tell them? What's some of the advice that you give to corporate America to be able to better connect?
Part of it is, and this is true to corporate, is probably true to human nature as well, that sometimes we don't pay attention until something is on fire. Mm-hmm. And we're running out of time. And especially from a business perspective, it's about the bottom line. And so unless there is a direct impact that they're seeing, that's tangible, that's physical, I can touch, then the urgency is not often there, right? So there's this desire. I've had beautiful conversations with leading companies about, a desire to create a better work experience for associates, a desire to create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. But because of the lack of prioritization or the lack of sense of urgency, the follow through isn't always there. And so a lot of my role has been around kind of what's the low hanging fruit? What is the baseline? What are the baseline opportunities? If you're not doing anything else, if you're not in a space where you can be fully committed to systemic change, what are some of the things that you can be doing now? And so some of that might look one-off programmatic. It's always best, and there are some organizations that I work with that are really looking at systemic change, mm-hmm. how do we change our processes, our policies, and what metrics do we have in place kind of to hold us accountable. But there are many organizations who are not there yet. And so that's the hard part when it's not attached to a corporate business objective, or when it's not attached mm-hmm. to and it's not on fire. Mm-hmm. And on fire is generally when there's an issue, there's some employee who's speaking up and saying, I haven't had a good experience, or I'm experiencing discrimination. So trying to find that sweet spot between, okay, not necessarily there yet where we're being held accountable from a business objective and a compensation perspective, but also we're not having this big reputation crisis. So what are some of the things we can do to demonstrate that this is something that is important?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because I also think some of it is like what I've seen, at least externally, is it's generational, right? It's like there's a lot of people that I work with that will, complain that the younger generation isn't working enough hours, isn't doing enough of this. And I think good for them, right? Good for them for raising their hand and saying, like, why should we be working every weekend, right? Like, why should we be working 20 hours a day? And so I think that there's a lot of like intergenerational learning to be had in wellness at work, right? Like, I think of that sometimes. I hear these conversations and I'm like, yeah, why why did I do that? And I really try to deconstruct that and think how much of that is attached with like the immigrant mentality, right? Or like the pressure to succeed. And how much of it was tied with just the corporate cultural pressure of success and visually seeing you online all the time, visually having you respond to emails all the time. You know, what do you think that there's a shift?
I think so, and definitely, I think it's a combination of those things, like you said, for the corporate pressures, but then also for people of color, those cultural demands and expectations that we put on ourselves. So it becomes like this horrible recipe for disaster because you're getting pressure from all sources, right? And so, yeah, I love that, that Generation Z, early Y, they're like, no, right? Because I'm interested in other things. I can't give you my life. But one of the things we're hearing about recently, you guys might have seen some of the headlines, is this idea of quiet quitting. And the older workforce, they're saying like, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be present, but you have get everything you need between 9 to 5, because after that, I want my life back. And so I think that in addition to figuring out how to engage the generation that we talked about earlier, having to engage the Xers, the old millennials who are, and I think a lot of it has to do with COVID, when, for 2 years, there were no boundaries between home and life. And people were really loving, the fact that they had better access to life and better quality of life. And so now that once you get a taste of that, it's hard to go back.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Valerie. What's quiet quitting and what's just boundaries?
I think that I think you shouldn't have to quiet quit.
Yeah.
Right. But it's hard to maintain, it's hard to create the boundary. And then it's definitely hard to then honor the boundary. Right. We might understand what we need to put in place, but there's also an understanding that boundaries aren't accepted, otherwise they won't be needed.
Yeah, it kind of has this connotation that it's like passive aggressive, right? That like people are kind of like, not sharing about it, kind of huffing and puffing by themselves and doing this. But what would you recommend if somebody's in that position where they're like, I am so overworked, I'm tired of this, I was hired to do one job and paid to do one job, now they're asking me to do all this. Instead of quiet quitting, what would you advise them?
Yeah, so I would advise, and this is something that I advise for a number of different reasons, but to be your own advocate. Regardless of where you are, you have to be your own advocate, and you have to have your best interests in mind. And for me, definitely from a mental health perspective, that starts with your wellness. And so, and what I learned when I was still in corporate, and I would get caught up in that grind and trying to live up to these perceptions as far as always being available and working weekends and long hours, of course, my mental health would suffer. I'd be so overwhelmed, and where I wouldn't be able to focus enough on the things outside of work that needed attention. And then also physiologically, then your immune system starts to suffer. So I would get colds and they would last for forever, right? And meanwhile, I'm still traveling and in meetings and still trying to be functional with these never-ending colds, because when you're stressed, that's the first thing that suffers is your immune system. And so at some point, you have to become your own advocate and say that I have to take care of myself first, and be okay with that, with an understanding that I know if I take care of myself first, everyone around me will benefit. But we don't believe that. We believe that it's selfish or self-centered, or we're not working hard enough, when the opposite is true. I think in general, people don't have a problem with working long hours or having to work some weekends, especially when they're in a culture that they love, when they have leaders and they feel supported and who are advocates for them, when they love what they do. It's almost hard to shut off, right? It's like, let me stop. It doesn't even feel like I'm working. But there's a lot that is required in order to create environments where such is true, where people love their job, where they're connected to the people, where they feel supported. So it's not an either or. If the project, calls for me having to overextend myself, and this is the exception versus the norm, most people don't have a problem with that. And so being able to advocate for yourself, talk to your leaders, talk to your direct manager, be specific about, you know, here's what I'm willing to give, but there has to be reciprocity. We take care of each other.
Take care of each other. And also, we talk about demystifying tough topics. I think about unpacking them, right? I've worked in startup cultures. I've worked in really cutthroat, competitive cultures. One thing that I've learned that has led to more beneficial, more successful, happier experiences is clarity, right? I think when there's like chaos and when there is disorder from the managers, like I think of like, what are the tangible things that the managers can do? And I think so much of it has to do with clarity. Wherever there's like one tiny little bit of stress, that's usually very connected to what's the opposite of clarity, right? Of confusion. Like, people think different things. And I have thought a lot about how difficult clarity is, right? It's very difficult first to find clarity, to find the simplicity in complex issues, then to clarify it, and then to communicate it, right? So I think if you can get to that level, then that leads to happier teams because they all know what they're working for and they can all share the applause. Is there anything else that you've seen that helps teams function? Like, what can leaders do differently?
I think leaders have to become more accountable for creating that clarity. Time and time again, what you hear from employees is there's a lack of prioritization. Right? I don't know what's important because everything is important.
Yeah.
What's on fire because everything is on fire.
And
so it's hard to commit and give the best parts of yourself if you feel like you're defeated before you even start. It's hard to, it's hard if not impossible to be hyper effective when you're operating from a place of defeat. And so if I am a leader, I have to be held accountable for providing clarity for the people that I lead. Otherwise, I can't have any real expectations.
Vallerie, this is Natalie. How are you?
Great.
And I'm moving to where I could probably go on camera in a minute. But I think one of the things that you've nailed so many things. I often joke that quiet quitting is Gen Z. You're not going to work me to death and drive me crazy. And I think that what I have tried to say, because one of my goals is to be an elder, not just an older. I am trying to help millennials and Zs put my upbringing into context, because if I'm really honest, a lot of what was depicted as leadership when I was coming of age is bullying, straight bullying. And I think these young people, like I had I went through a yoga teacher training program, but one of the, before the world blew up, and never got to teach my class because, COVID had other plans. But there was a millennial, and I used to call her, this was a teacher already, I used to call her my yoga daughter teacher. She really helped ease my journey into the practice when I was practicing. And the look on her face when I told her that your principal could paddle you, you could just tell for a moment, she just thought I was joking. I'm like, no. You could go to school and the principal could give you a spanking. And then she's like, really? That happened? And it just made me laugh. So they have no context, and I love that. Because a lot of what I was taught as leadership was straight bullying, abusive, not fair, all over the place. So I love, and I think that quiet quitting, of course, once it goes mainstream, it gets all messed up, but it really is boundaries, and you're not going to bully me and call it leadership. You're not going to make me work 4,000 hours just because you can. And I think we're all, it's interesting. I've been remotely working for 15 years. And so the perceptions have changed a lot. But I think people see now, like, wait, why y'all want me there for what? And so I think they're asking really great questions. I have to say, being Gen X, I didn't question those things. It was like your boss was your boss, authority was authority. This collaboration, this accountability, it just didn't exist. So what I did try to contribute, and I noticed it's very different in middle management, I think, than even top of the house. When we were going through the pandemic, I volunteered to sort of hear people out because I just felt it was really odd that people were moving as if like the world wasn't collapsing around us, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, we're really just going to pretend that none of this is happening. Like people are pinched. People are now preschool teachers and your employee. And let's talk about it. And I went and I did interviews and I talked to people, probably something I would never volunteer to do again, because it just felt like leaders just felt like, well, you're on your own. So but I think what I've learned from that, and I think you've nailed it too, Vallerie, is you advocating for yourself is also recognizing when your needs aren't being met and like, okay, this is not a safe space for me. I need to find that. I need to create that. I need to find pockets of that. So that's sort of what I kind of walked away with, because I'm like, you can have the data, you can have, I had direct quotes, and it just felt like it was just, I think there could possibly be a generation of leaders that don't really know how to lead other than the way that was modeled. And now even when I watch television, I'm like, that's not leadership. That's bullying. Like, why are we showing people hitting people upside the head to make them, like, I see it now in ways that I didn't. And I really feel like we have a huge experience gap, you know? And so what I also try to tell millennials and Zs is I'm like, you all have language that I'm learning, a language of inclusion, language of fairness that I'm like, I love it, but sometimes I need a glossary because I'm like, yeah, that isn't right. You know, and I know how to use these terms. I think we as, you know, wherever we are in out generationally, we have to kind of be willing to admit, like, we don't know how to model this. Like, that is not the way it was. And then we have to and I like reverse mentoring for that reason, because when you do hear them out versus complain about, I don't know, you know, how I feel like Gen Z is so proud that we drove without seatbelts and drank from, you know, garden hoses that, you know, let's talk about what it really was. They weren't really that safe or protected. So let's keep that real too, right? Not just strong, but just like people it wasn't a thing then. I think we have to be willing to listen and then really learn and practice new leadership models and new collaboration models that aren't based on old archetypes. And so, you know, I had a lot to say, but you guys had said so many powerful things, and I know I'm not on camera. I want you to know I'm listening, and I agree wholeheartedly to what you all are just putting down.
Yeah, excellent points, Natalie. I think the way I see it is intimidation is not as effective for that generation because there are options. If you think about for Generation Z, you know, the option was corporate. The option was academia, right? Again, these more traditional, safe, stable constructs. And so if I'm there and that is my only other option, there was little support around creative careers. I remember when I went to college, I initially went in wanting to work in television and radio production, but I was talked out of it by everyone from family and friends. And how are you going to get a job? We have not seen that done before. And so get the corporate job that's steady, that's stable, get somewhere, do well and retire. And so when it feels like that is your only option, then that leaves you more susceptible to influence into intimidation, because I'm not going to do anything to mess this up. Whereas again, for the younger millennials and Generation Z, it's like sky's the limit. They are literally superheroes. They believe that there is nothing that they can't do across any industry. And I admire that. Of course, to my earlier point, I think there's some learning that could be attached to that will allow them to thrive. But when I'm in a situation and I feel like you are not kind of my end all be all, then yeah, there's less that I'm going to tolerate, and intimidation isn't as much of a factor.
Right. I love that. Options, choices. And I guess probably what else you you in your intro, you gave yourself choices by preparing
Mm-hmm.
for your transition and your pivot in a way that, you know, a lot of times I think boomers are probably tell, oh no, you got to wait, finish that out,
Yeah.
then you get to do it. So
Yeah.
kudos to you for having an exit strategy and really wonderful transition.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But listen, the boomers in my life didn't know until I made the decision to leave. Literally, they did not know.
Yes.
Right. But we have to have that same respect as far as the differences generationally. And again, that's my fear with corporate is they're not seeing the gap. They're more nearsighted. And literally, we're only talking about maybe the matter of a decade, if that, where I think there's really going to be a war on talent. We kind of, that language has become popular maybe in the past few years. And I think that, I don't know if people really believe it. I think they have some assumptions about the possibility that there's going to be a shortage of talent. But that's going to be very real in 10 years, and especially with the pandemic, right? There was already a war on talent before the pandemic. People, again, making different career choices, trade skills, picking up things along those lines. Now you have the pandemic where you have people who were already in those roles saying, I don't want it anymore. I want to do or explore something else. And then a generation behind them who are not really interested or engaged at all. I remember our oldest, we would bring him to work at different times. He thought it was fun, but he's like, you know, once he got to middle school and high school, he's like, I can never do what you guys do. Like sitting behind a desk all day, there's nothing appealing about that. And he meant it for sure. So yeah, we kind of need to sound the alarm now as far as what the disadvantages will be from a workforce perspective if we don't figure out how corporate and more of the traditional career paths more appealing for that generation.
Right.
So valuable. Thanks. I'm super excited too. I saw that Autumn joined the call. She's an alumni from a school out of Baltimore, and I've been following and watching her trajectory and her path, and it's so impressive because she sits at the intersection too of mental health and well-being and focus on BIPOC communities. She's been growing her Instagram audience by a lot very quickly, rapid growth. And Autumn, I'm just curious to hear your take on this conversation. You know, what are some of your thoughts and what are some of your learnings that you've seen?
Hi everyone. So glad to see you and to be here and to be able to make it. I was, cross my fingers that I'll be able to make it after coming from my part-time. Speaking of, working. But yeah, so, coming into the conversation and hearing, that solid quitting and literally, I was just like, oh my goodness, it's like that. He's like, I just got here and they're already kind of attacking me. But, I definitely am, can attest as a millennial myself that a lot of my friends and I, in our conversations have, recognized the lack of satisfaction, in regards to some of the, I guess you could say, the standard models of work. Being in mental health, I've definitely found myself being very disappointed, very disappointed with some of the work models and the top heavy companies that I've worked for. Not going to name any names, but, I've found myself now being a full licensed therapist in LCPC. At one point, I didn't want to start like my own company or my own, practice, but the more dissatisfaction and discouragement that I feel, that I'm, witnessing, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start my own thing. And then when you were talking about, I'm a war on talent, I'm like, a lot of my friends are like, yeah, we're done with capitalism. We're done with, working for the man, and, we want to do our own thing. A lot of us want to leave America, and kind of just, work abroad and have passive income and, just so over just the workforce all in all. Being in the mental health industry, I am really passionate and fond, of, mental well-being, and, really shedding, more light and awareness about prioritizing your mental hygiene and self-care, especially for, the BIPOC community. And it's like, it's kind of a slap in the face almost when it's just, I've had a couple experiences, excuse me. I had a couple experiences where it's just I felt taken advantage of, by my employers. For example, I fresh out of college, it was like a $15 an hour job. I was traveling all over the state of Maryland, providing so many services for so many people in need. And I decided to go to Cuba. I was really excited to, to visit this country, to take this vacation, my first like big vacation with my friends. It was like a week long, had like only 3 days PTO. Can you believe it? I literally only had 3 days PTO in this company. And the way that it operated is, if I had just, I decided to take all 3 of my days and take 2 no PTO days. And I was still working, while I'm on my vacation, right? Again, mental health, social services. And I get back and they tell me that one of the days will not be honored because it was a training day. And I'm like, I beg your pardon?
Oh my God.
They were like, it will not be honored because it's a training day and you weren't here. I'm like, but you all approved it. Like my supervisor approved this training day, and they were like, okay, well, you can either make up for it by putting in extra hours, or you can take this no PTO day. And me being young out of college, I'm like, it's just a no PTO day, but it was a slap in the face. And this is just one of different experiences that I've had where it's just like, are you serious? Like I show up, I do what I need to do, and I'm providing not just for the company, but for the clients and for the community. This is like community-based services. And it's just, and that's where I find the disappointment. I was actually just in my kitchen thinking to myself that my burnout never really comes from my clients. It never really comes from working with, my clients, no matter their acuity level. My burnout comes from the lack of pay and being underpaid, being overworked, the lack of benefits, high cost of care because of the, not a coverage from my insurance. That's where my burnout comes from. And so, just hearing you, Vallerie, talk about, how a lot of, folks in our generation is just, ultimately fed up. It's really just from these outdated systems. And I am noticing that some folks, some new companies, and maybe even, companies that are more seasoned are starting to see that and trying to make some changes. However, it's very gradual and very far in between. So, yeah.
Autumn, that's so profound. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of that as well, right? Like the outdated systems, maybe 10 years ago, that could have worked with, okay, I'm lucky just to have a job. Thank you very much. Right. And to your point, Vallerie, like there's options nowadays, and good for you. I mean, I think like, I wish there was a magic formula for like, how many red flags do you need? Right. And like, what, and do you recognize them as red flags? Like, is there a way, Vallerie, to know if you're seeing a red flag?
I think we don't always feel comfortable asking the right questions during the interview process.
Interesting. It starts with the interview process, right?
That's with the interview process. There's so much that you can know even before you start to have the formal conversations with the hiring managers and teams. LinkedIn is a powerful tool, and so when you get that interest from the company, you go on LinkedIn and see who might know someone who's with that organization, so you can start to ask questions about the people, about the culture, about the work. And then once you have that opportunity to interview, too many times we're just happy to be chosen. And just happy to I'm just happy to be there when we're not necessarily taking the time to get the information that we do have access to during the interview process. And it sounds really corny. You guys probably heard this before, but you should be interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So ask those direct questions about culture, ask the direct questions about work-life balance, ask the direct questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ask for the hardcore examples. Ask about what is your leadership style. Give information on, well, here's my work style. Here is how I thrive. Could I thrive in this environment? So you can't always know all the you obviously can't see the red flags before you get into the organization, but there's a lot that you can ask. You should be in discovery mode.
That's such a good point. And it's like having the confidence of going in there and doing it as opposed to just like, thanks for choosing me. Right. I always think that work hard, play hard is a red flag now. I've heard that a lot in startups, and I'm like, I know what that means. I know that translates too.
70 hours a week and play ping pong on the 7th floor.
Yeah, thanks for the free foosball table. I'm good. I'd rather go home. Vallerie, that's helpful. I want to be mindful. We're top of the hour right now, but before we go, one of the things that we like to leave with at Cura is resources and practical tools. From an internal perspective, we have been working very closely and sponsored crisis text line. It is a 24-hour, 7 days a week text service to provide emotional support for moments of need. Anyone who watches this, who is on this call, anyone who's a member of Cura is welcome to use our sponsored hotline at Cura 741-741. It's all private and anonymized data. I use it a lot myself. It's a really great, like a really emotionally trained friend to help you during those tough times. Are there any additional resources, Vallerie, that you recommend or resources that you could share with us?
Yeah, so there are a couple. I always recommend Psychology Today. It is one of the largest databases where you can identify mental health professionals within your area. What I love about it is that you can search not only by zip code, but you can search based on the specific issue that you're having. You could search based on identity, people who are comfortable working with LGBTQ plus clients, people of color. So Psychology Today is one. I'm going to share some resources with Jen so she can share with this group. Two of them are the Feeling Wheel. And that to me is where I talked about, how critical it is to make sure that you're prioritizing your own wellness in order to be effective anywhere. The Feeling Wheel is a perfect way to do that. It kind of gives you the vocabulary that you need to identify your emotions and then take that next step and begin articulating your emotional experience to others. So it's a wonderful tool. I didn't invent it. But I think that for me, it's just such an excellent resource. It's even when you're having those moments where you're like, something is off or something is not right, or I feel some kind of way, we have a responsibility to, again, put labels to those emotions. And so that's an excellent resource to help do that. So I'll make sure you guys all have that. And then the other is a self-care wheel. And it's like a beautiful menu option of I think at least more than 50 things to do. You don't always have the luxury of, going off on a spa retreat. So that it might include little things like, stopping and taking 10 breaths or going for a walk. So those are a couple resources we'll, get out.
Thanks, Vallerie. We'll be sure to share those. And I really appreciate the tactical tools, right? Like just having exact next steps really helps me give concrete action items. And Alejandro, I know, has been working hard on the Cura site to provide some financial, career, and other mental health resources. Alex, can you share and speak a little bit to the resources we have available for our community?
Yes, sure. So in addition to all these awesome people that are coming here to talk to our members, we want to actually honor our name and curate some resources and make them available for users and members. Our idea is not to profit or anything on this. It's just to make them all available. So anyone that goes to our website are going to keep finding. We're just populating this, and we're going to keep adding in based on our conversations and our research, adding trusted resources to help people get tools to improve their networking, career, financial education, and mental health skills and resources. So we just wanted to point it out that our website is not just meant to feature the talks and all, but also is supposed to be a tool itself for users to find a lot of resources in there. So we wanted to show that update on our website.
Thank you, Alejandro. And if anybody has additional resources from this group, this is really just a place to share and disperse information and resources that we have found to be useful and trustworthy during our journeys. So feel free to send them over to me, and we're happy to share them with the broader community at any time. But I am super grateful to have leaders, socially conscious leaders, and active advocates like Valeri Williams come to speak to our community specifically, share these resources. We'll distribute this broadly so that all the schools, the 47 schools, their alumni networks can have this, and also share this on our website. And if there's any questions, Autumn, if you want to connect directly with Vallerie, send her a LinkedIn notice, put Cura in there, keep in touch, look for Natalie at the beginning of the chat. She added her LinkedIn. We want you all to build your networks, keep networking and expanding your reach. So thank you all for the time and for joining us today.
Thank you again, Jen and Alejandro.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank
Take
you.
care. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.